When it comes to the history of the sport of professional wrestling, there's one question that's always on every wrestling fan's mind. What if? What if this wrestler hadn't gotten injured? What if this wrestler hadn't been killed in a car wreck? What if this wrestler hadn't left this territory? What if things had worked out better for this particular professional wrestler? There are many upon many. It's a list that goes all the way to the goddamn Earth's core. Because the world of professional wrestling is vast, insane, and full of even more insane people. One of those really insane people is Billy Jack Haynes. What if Billy Jack Haynes had been able to parlay his incredible look, physical charisma, and ability to draw people in, not just in Portland, Oregon, but able to take that worldwide and stick to actually doing professional wrestling and actually make a ton of goddamn money at it? What if Billy Jack Haynes hadn't flamed the fuck out and left people wondering, what the fuck is he goddamn on about at this point? And what if Billy Jack Haynes had actually been a fucking goddamn piece of shit that used people and made up vast conspiracy theories because he just deep down wasn't a very good guy? Yeah, it's going to be one of those videos, folks, so let's get to it. I'm John Retton with my review of Dark Side of the Ring, Truth Lies in Billy Jack Haynes. I knew enough about Billy Jack Haynes going into this. I knew they were going to be able to cover all of it, and I'm not going to get into the minutia of every single story and the crimes and what crimes he may or may not have been involved in. I'm going to say right now, I hope Billy Jack Haynes gets the fucking chair for this. I really do hope he gets a chair for this. Because, I'm sorry, I do not buy a fucking goddamn bit of sympathy from this motherfucker. Portland's own, Pacific Northwest born and bred. Am I saying that he started out as a terrible person? I mean, I don't know, maybe. It's really goddamn hard to tell, and they skipped over quite a bit of the stuff that he did during his wrestling career because they were focusing more on the crimes and the various, conspiracy theories and all the bullshit they did. He had the look and the intensity and also the insanity, and not that he was the only insane person in professional wrestling, but come on. There's a story later on from Larry Oliver, the son of Rip Oliver, that just made me think, well, that's a fucking scummy thing to do. And this is coming from somebody that has reviewed every single Dark Side of the Ring and remembers the Matt Bourne Doink the Clown episode. Anyway, Jim Cornette said, you want to say nothing in wrestling surprises you? That's surprising. Interspersed with stuff about, the fact that he killed his wife. Billy Jack, not Cornette. I really should have actually, spaced that out a little bit better. And yes, I listen to the Cornette podcast. Get upset at me. I don't care. I find them entertaining. So, the talking heads were Billy Jack Haynes from jail, where he fucking belongs, where he actually honestly belonged well before this. Jim Cornette, Ken Patera. I'm sorry, Billy Jack should have been in jail for ripping off all the people that he did when he tried to start his own wrestling promotion. More on that later. Anyway, so Jim Cornette providing the wrestling historian aspect, and I know there are people that don't care for him, that's fine. But he does provide great wrestling history. Dave Meltzer, who actually did have some poignant comments here. Mike Miller. Bill Alfonso, who is still alive. I'm very surprised by that. Len Denton, who was the grappler. And the aforementioned Larry Oliver, Rip Oliver's son. He was great. He was a fucking star of this whole goddamn thing. He was great. If they ever do one about Rip Oliver, which might be a deep cut, deep album cut, as it were, I really do hope that they actually get him for that. But, I don't know if Rip Oliver's career would be that remarkable for one. I'm not knocking Rip Oliver, but if they ever do, I would love to see him back because he was great here. So, he really did look great. That's the one thing about Billy Jack. He did look fucking great, and he actually had to change the name from Billy Jack to Billy Jack Haynes because of the movie Billy Jack with Tom Laughlin. Portland's own, and then assault charges before he was 30. And the thing is, you take a look at where Billy Jack is now. He's 70, 71, whatever it is. Which means by the time his mainstream wrestling career was over, he was like 30, 33 or something like that. Because he worked in Oregon, he would bounce around other territories. And he would get injured in WCW. I'm not saying that he didn't actually get injured, but I do have a hard time believing, by the way, that it probably wasn't from him doing something monumentally stupid, like all the drugs he was fucking on. So, Larry Oliver, he was great. David Sierra, he was a Cuban assassin. I believe there were 2 Cuban assassins. He was great. He was great in this as well. I did like how Ken Patera was in this. He looks remarkably good for a man that seemingly died 10 years ago. So the old footage was nice. I love seeing Don Owen on a big channel. Well, maybe not a big channel because Vice is so obscure that I actually have to get a subscription to Sling because my satellite TV service does not carry Vice, at least that often. But whatever. And I do apologize, by the way, if my voice still sounds rough. I've been dealing with a bout of allergies that just taken the goddamn energy out of me. But let's just move on from that. So the Portland, Oregon footage was nice to see, and he had a great look and everything, and started early. He had his dad who was blind. He would always go home to see his dad. And he seemed to love his dad, and that's great. Now, more on his dad here in a bit. I had to mention his dad right here. But, the thing is like, it was kind of cool to see the Billy Jack movie with Tom Laughlin. I actually probably should rewatch that at some point, because I haven't seen it in a long time. They skipped over the fact that he had a stint in Stampede Wrestling, I believe. I don't know if it was too long, but he had a stint in Stampede Wrestling and World Class. Now, he was brought in because I believe Kerry Von Erich was up for a part in Rocky IV, which he didn't get. My God, that movie would have been a fucking Titanic disaster if Kerry Von Erich had gotten that part, because they probably would have had him be Ivan Drago. And, well, Kerry's grasp of the English language was about as good as Ivan Drago's, except Ivan Drago was intimidating, and Kerry just would look confused. Why'd I feel the need to pick on Kerry Von Erich for once? Shut up, anybody in the comments. It's only once. So, they did also skip over the fact that he was featured on WWF magazines with Hogan and other stars in like 85, but didn't come in. Didn't come in until 86. And I believe this was told on Cornette's podcast and like other interviews, but that's when the reputation was starting. He was in Portland. He was in Stampede. He was in World Class. He bounced around. I don't remember if he was in Crockett during that time. I don't remember if he was. Apologize if he was. Wrestling's a story of mine and brain fog. I apologize. But by then, he was starting to have a reputation that not necessarily unreliable, just a little bit nuts. And then he teamed with Ken Patera. And Pat Patterson came in with some chainsaws and some other fucking chainsaws, so come and get it. You're going to be the Oregon Lumberjacks now. I don't believe that Pat Patterson would have been wielding around two chainsaws. That guy deserved to have a chainsaw taken to him for what he did to the Ring Boys. Allegedly, let me cover my ass right there, but I don't know if they would necessarily done that. They mentioned how Billy was his own worst enemy. He slapped Percy Pringle during a stint in Florida. That was a stint I forgot about. He was snapped for little to no reason. He would get upset at people for finishes being changed, what I believe was the Percy Pringle thing and other stuff going on. They interspersed with footage from his, conviction and his time in jail, where he's still there and belongs. And he says that, yes, she's dead, but it's not second-degree murder. That's overblown. More on that in a bit. Patera basically said he was manipulative. And yes, Billy wasn't the only one, but he was on 20 to 25 painkillers a day. And I mean, he was a lot. There were a lot of fucking people that were. I mean, Terry Gordy in 93 fucking passed out, and had the brain thing and stuff like that. But Patera says that because Billy was unreliable, they very briefly showed WrestleMania 3. One guy said, there was over 100,000 people there. So now WWF's, WWE stuff is just going worldwide with all the stupid narrative. It was actually more like 80,000 instead of 93,173. I will die on that hill. But him and Patera were a team. They were teaming up in like later 87. Because Patera had returned from the conviction with the McDonald's incident with Masa Saito. I'm not going to go into that, but suffice to say, somebody overplayed their hand, an employee there. There was food they were going to throw out. They said, we'll pay you for it. We've been on the road, we're very hungry. And then, shit went south, basically. But Patera was back there, and they were teaming up. And I actually forgot they teamed up because it was so brief. I don't know if they were going to be pushed much in 1987. Go take a look at the amount of teams that they had in 1987. I mean, they still had the Killer Bees. They had teams that were there. The Rougeaus were going to be coming in at some point. Or no, maybe the Rougeaus were already there. They had enough people there. They had the Bulldogs, even though Dynamite's back was fucked. And speaking of bad people, the whole point is, I don't know if Patera and Billy Jack Haynes were going to be pushed all that much. And they ended up leaving in, I believe January of 88, somewhere around there. And He passed out on a plane. They didn't want that bad publicity. He was like seizuring and that kind of stuff, so he was let go. Then he created the Oregon Wrestling Federation to compete with Don Owen. Instead, yes, and Don Owen's Portland Wrestling at that point was having issues. It was one of the last goddamn territories, because if you take a look at the landscape in 1988, Crockett Promotions was doing well, relatively speaking. They were about the only one doing well. AWA was basically a wasteland. God forbid if Billy had gone there. World Class was pretty much they were having a creative resurgence, but the crowds weren't really coming back. They wouldn't come back till Jerry Jarrett ended up taking over the goddamn thing and boosting stuff back up in the Sportatorium. Whole point is, he didn't have a lot of goddamn options because he burned a whole lot of goddamn bridges. Instead of going back to Don Owen and working with him, even if like it was for less money than he had been getting in WWF for like a year and a half, whatever it was that he was there, it would have shown respect to Don Owen. Like Don Owen, Sam Muchnick, and I don't remember who it. There's like one other promoter, Paul Bosch. I think Paul Bosch was it. They were well-respected guys for paying people well, paying people properly, paying them down to the penny in some cases, and they would make sure the people were taken care of. And he still could have made some decent money in Portland, even as things were going downhill. And Portland wrestling, I think, by 91, early 92 was done. But still, he would have had a couple decent years, and if he had stayed on the straight and narrow and not met a piece of shit, he would have been able to maybe ingratiate himself. Who knows? He might have been able to go back in 1990 in WWF and imagine Billy Jack versus the Ultimate Warrior. Good Lord. But they skipped over his time in WCW. That was in 91. He was a masked executioner. He was something blood. He was something blood. Because he had an executioner-like gimmick. And the UWF with Herb Abrams, my God, and Memphis, because he had stints in Memphis. He actually was still working in like the late or early to mid 90s. I think even Cornette talked about how he was on a Smoky Mountain show or two. But then we start getting into the Boys on the Track thing from Saline County in Arkansas, which was in 87. That was August, like late August of 87. Said he was there. And he's told this story, and basically he said that like it was a drug deal. He'd been running stuff for coke or coke deals and working with, tough crime families and all that. And that he videotaped it from the woods, but he was in a wrestling mask. The kids saw it, and then the kids ended up dying. And he said he did this after he wrestled Bundy. So Bundy at that point, by the way, was only working house shows. And so I'm not saying he didn't wrestle Bundy. But with that schedule and with how hard they were going, they were running for like 3 weeks straight sometimes with no days off. Until maybe they got a few days off and then they would go right back on the goddamn road. He took time to go all the way down to Arkansas, where I think he was at least in the upper Northeast, if not somewhere like maybe in Chicago, something like that. He was somewhere where it would have been quite the goddamn trek, even if you were speeding and managed to avoid all the speed traps, to get down to Arkansas and film this. So, just enough details. His friend Don Humphreys was good in this as well, offered some insight. He still likes Billy as a friend, but I think he recognizes that he's also full of shit. Footage of Billy in shoots, and he was shipping uncut coke and all that stuff. RF video, Hannibal TV. That slope chin moron. I don't really care if anybody gets upset at me knocking Hannibal, because, yeah, maybe he could beat a general, individual like me up, but he couldn't win a goddamn fight against an actual athlete if he tried. He had to take it out on that goddamn referee and all that bullshit. That was in the Abdullah the Butcher episode, and I have no problem saying that, because what the fuck is he going to do? Is he going to get upset and target fans just because he doesn't like people knocking him for being a goddamn idiot? And he is a goddamn idiot. But at least we don't have to hear him, because he literally sounds like several stroke victims put together, which is a shame, because stroke victims can't help themselves. He was just born that way. So that being said, he says his parents died at the hands of politicians when he was a teenager. Or maybe in his early 20s, but then he would always go home and see his dad. And I think if I remember right, his dad's death was part of what led to him departing the WWF also, because he would go and he would end up seeing his dad died at some point. It was late 80s, early 90s, something like that. I don't exactly remember, but he had his dad's death kind of set him off on that. But then he says his parents were killed and there's someone involved in the Clintons. Nobody knows what's going on. He delivered drugs to Andy Gibb in 1978. Vince Sr. could be his father. Never mind the fact that Vince Sr. was in his 60s. How old was he? He was in his 60s or early 70s when he died. So, okay. Billy Jack, by the way, is 70, so all right. Let's go with that. Let's workshop this here. So Billy Jack would have been the 70s, cancer this year, so he'd have been born about 54. Okay. So he managed to father another kid that has been living in Oregon this whole time. And didn't bother to mention this now, but took care of this man that he felt was his father that was blinded in a wheelchair. Do you see where the problems are with a lot of these stories? So January 10th, 2006, my 25th birthday. An attempted murder on him. Damn shame it was just attempted. Phil Stanford, who was a journalist for the Portland Tribune, basically told Billy's story. There was the LaGuardia family, or LaGuardia family is what I'm going to call them. And they put a hit out on him because he had stolen money from them. And he had to play dead so he didn't die. He stole $200,000 from like a $1.2 million like purse, so to speak, from a deal. And then they killed him, or then they tried to kill him 16 years later. They didn't go after it before that. When he was in Oregon, till about 92, and then he would knock Oregon and shoot interviews and stuff like that, but he always lived in Oregon. Or at least vast majority of his time he always lived in Oregon. He would always do it. Do you see how difficult it is to get this stuff working because I'm not an insane piece of shit like him? So, the Oregon Wrestling Federation apparently had shady people funding it, and maybe it had something to do with drugs. And by the way, the Oregon Wrestling Federation, sorry, I feel the need to mention this. Don Owen paid people, but obviously they had smaller houses. I don't know if they still had Seattle at that point. They were constricting a bit, but they still had a decent tour. You know, local. You'd maybe make $800 to $1,000 a week if you were a top guy. You'd make decent money even if you were mid-card. But you could make other shots. There were other local promotions. I mean, there wasn't anything in California, but if you worked there part-time, you could fly out for a couple days. You could do something. The Oregon Wrestling Federation, he promised some guaranteed money, and it was pretty sizable. This was on original wrestling documentaries. It was on Billy Jack Haynes. Their darker side of the ring thing. And it was for pretty sizable money. But the thing is after a few shows, after a few weeks, maybe even a couple months, they were having some issues. And they were having to take half the money. And then half of that money. And you see where this is going. Bill Alfonso even said he got a check but wasn't supposed to cash it till Monday. He cashed it and left. And the thing is there's nothing wrong with trying to run opposition, especially if Don Owen was a bad person. But by all accounts, Don Owen was a pretty good promoter. And Billy Jack basically just went against the guy. They had given him his break. Not too much earlier in the decade, by the way. Because this was about 88, 89 that he started the Oregon Wrestling Federation. It's fucking ridiculous. And Portland wrestling was already on its ass at that point. But yeah, he shafted a whole bunch of goddamn people. He didn't treat them all that well. And various wrestlers didn't have any ability to like go much of anywhere. Some wrestlers even moved there, and some wrestlers basically had to maybe not bankrupt themselves, but basically go in the hole to move back out and go elsewhere, try to get jobs in WCW or whatever it was, or on the independents that were more in the East and the South, or the Northeast. Wrestling around the Pacific Northwest, by the way, guys, especially once Portland wrestling closed, was pretty much dead. Like, independents, like, were very spotty. There's a few independents now. Some are thriving, some exist. Various ones are shut down, and then ones start up. and then one's shut down, and then one's start up in their place, and I don't exactly understand what somebody's mindset is to do that, but nevertheless. So Rip Oliver opened his house to him. And this is right after Phil had said he told Billy about a killing of Michael Fracky, or however he said it. And then 2 months later, Billy suddenly is telling him about all this stuff, claiming he was there when he had never heard of the guy before. But then Rip Oliver had opened his home to Billy in Florida. That's because Billy needed a place to stay. Larry even talked about the fact that he was on a lot of strong painkillers because he was virtually in hospice. He was hurting, and he admitted that Rip Oliver was an addict, not to knock, but he was in a whole lot of pain. And that he basically stole his goddamn drugs and everything and used them. And then once Rip died, he called Brian Blair, who was part of the Cauliflower Alley Club. This was back in 2019. I mean, maybe he still is. I don't know. But he claimed that Rip owed a bunch of money on back taxes and owed on his house and this kind of stuff. Larry says that he didn't owe any taxes. So that just shows you what a fucking piece of shit Billy is. He wasted all his goddamn money. He butchered a goddamn relationship that he had with fucking Don Owen, who would have still paid him well, maybe not, exponentially. But he blew his opportunity with WWF. He blew an opportunity in WCW when they were handing out fucking contracts like candy. If you were just not a complete fuck up, you could get paid by WCW for a couple years. Like the Iron Sheik. When the Iron Sheik was brought on television for 2 months, was so out of shape they sent him home. His contract rolled over, and he got paid for another goddamn year. He got paid $200,000 and worked maybe 4 months. Billy Jack, as much of a fuck up as he was, could have done that. But no. He couldn't fucking do that. So he has to rip off Rip Oliver. That was not actually meant to be a pun. I'm sorry to the memory of Rip Oliver. But he claimed he owed taxes. Larry says he didn't. So he basically stiffed the goddamn Cauliflower Alley Club. He claims that it was all bullshit, which I hate to say it, but you know what? Billy can claim a lot of stuff, but why would Larry tell this story? Genuine question. Why would Larry bother to say anything about him stealing his dad's drugs? Why would Larry say anything about the fact that he ripped off Rip and did all this? Why would he say anything about that if at least there's not enough truth in it? And there's already a pattern of behavior from him treating people like shit. So there you go. Where there's smoke, there's fire. But yeah, he did that. Ripping off people with the Oregon Wrestling Federation. Getting jobs in wrestling when he had already torpedoed his goddamn career and his legacy that was minuscule at best. He might have been able to have a career into the mid-90s if he had kept his head on straight, and if his head was ever screwed on straight to begin with. But let's be honest, by the time we got to the mid-90s, what if we got to the late 90s? You think we would have saw Billy Jack Haynes in the goddamn Attitude Era? No. Imagine him versus Dr. Death. Dr. Death would have torn him apart. Yes, even Brawl for all Dr. Death. But Rip Oliver, well, I feel bad for Larry, I really do. But just, yeah, stealing a bunch of money from like the Cauliflower Alley, which I'm not even saying the Cauliflower people are great or good, bad, or indifferent, but come on. So anyway, he starts a relationship with Jan Baycraft, or whatever. Jan. And the mother of his friend Todd, who died in 2021, they said, and he ends up marrying her. Now, she's 85, he's 70. Maybe they knew each other before. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I don't. But, Tom Matthew, who's a neighbor, talked about how Billy was pretty nice. Everybody was kept to themselves. And then she had dementia and all this stuff. And I remember this vividly, waking up and seeing, on Twitter and seeing on various other social media. February 8th, 2024. What the fuck? Why is this about Billy Jack Haynes? What? You knew that Billy Jack Haynes was insane, but what? he said, apparently he says with Mercy killing, she had dementia and she didn't know who the hell she was. And look, dementia is a goddamn killer. I mean, literally, because it eats you alive. But I don't think it's a Mercy killing, especially shooting her in the head. What if there's a small chance it doesn't work? Then you gotta do it again. Then it looks like you're just a goddamn killer, which Billy Jack Haynes is. But what was the reason? Like, what was it? What in the world? And what's his legacy? Like, what is his legacy? He had a short career in wrestling and then pretty much became a goddamn moron. And, manipulative moron, and somebody where eventually karma caught up to him. And I don't have any goddamn sympathy for Billy Jack Haynes. He thinks that he has a chance to get out, and God forbid if he does, the Portland goddamn, court system is fucked. Even though it's mostly the Oregon court system. Next week, the original Sheik, Ed Farhat. That's going to be interesting. I wonder if they'll talk about the Onita thing, like they mentioned in the Onita FMW episode, where Sheik's skin nearly melted off because Onita got a whole bunch of money from people and fuck talents. Anyway, I'll talk about that next week if they mention it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rethlin. I'll see you soon.